At 16, a single year feels like an entire geologic era. You haven't lived long enough to understand the terrifying speed of time, so a 12-month relationship feels less like a high school milestone and more like a legally binding marriage. You think you've built an empire, completely oblivious to the fact that you're just playing in a sandbox. I learned this the hard way. It took exactly 3 minutes of a crackling, unhinged voicemail to shatter my entire illusion of teenage romance, and a neon-drenched city festival 8 months later to realize I had dodged a massive, spiritually unhinged bullet. This isn't just a story about a bad breakup. It's a story about disrespect, the bizarre things people do when they haven't moved on, and a stolen temporary bus stop sign. We were both 16. Her name was Tamsin. We were a year deep into the kind of relationship that involved walking each other to classes and aggressively texting under our desks. Because we were in different academic tracks, our midterm exam weeks didn't line up. Hers arrived first, descending like a dark cloud over her social life. When I asked if she wanted to grab pizza or study together, her response was an immediate, stressed-out rejection. She needed absolute focus. She needed space. I considered myself a fiercely logical and understanding guy, so I gave her exactly what she asked for. For 7 straight days, I became a ghost. I didn't text, I didn't call, and I didn't complain. I just let her breathe. Then the calendar flipped. It was my turn in the academic meat grinder. I had 3 heavy-hitting exams back-to-back, and my brain was already leaking out of my ears. Suddenly, Tamsin's schedule was wide open, and she wanted to hang out. I responded with the exact same grace she had offered me the week prior. I told her I couldn't. I needed to study, but we would definitely celebrate once Friday afternoon rolled around. I thought that was the end of it. I thought we were operating on a foundation of mutual respect. Instead, I put my phone on silent, dove into my calculus textbook for 3 hours, and emerged to find a notification for a voicemail. It was 3 minutes long. I pressed play, expecting a slightly annoyed sigh or maybe a dramatic plea for attention. What came out of the speaker was a stereo assault of absolute delusion. It was Tamsin, but she wasn't alone. Barking through the tinny audio of my phone was her mother, Mrs. Vance. They had apparently teamed up to deliver a dual lecture on my profound failures as a partner. Tamsin's mother's voice was shrill, cutting through the background static to inform me that a girlfriend should always be priority number 1. Above math, above biology, above my own future. They took turns berating me, accusing me of neglect, and declaring that I was failing fundamentally as a boyfriend because I chose a textbook over a Tuesday night hangout. I sat there on the edge of my bed, the phone heavy in my palm, blinking at the sheer absurdity of what I had just heard. It didn't make me angry, not at first. It just felt fundamentally wrong. The hypocrisy was so glaring it practically glowed in the dark. I didn't leave a 3-minute rant in return. I simply typed out a single text message, hit send, and tossed the phone onto my mattress. I'll probably have my diploma a hell of a lot longer than I'll have this relationship. The fallout was absolute silence. Tamsin instituted a complete freeze-out. For 2 unbroken weeks, she treated me like I was entirely invisible. If I walked down the left side of the hallway, she practically sprinted down the right. If I tried to catch her eye near the lockers, she would suddenly become intensely fascinated by the combination dial. She thought she was punishing me, starving me out until I crawled back with an apology. But the silence didn't break me, it just clarified things. By the end of the 2nd week, I was exhausted by the childish theater of it all. I walked straight into her homeroom. The air smelled distinctly of chalk dust, stale floor wax, and the cheap vanilla body spray she always wore. She was sitting on top of a desk, surrounded by her friends. The moment I approached, she turned her head, deliberately looking at the cinderblock wall. I didn't whisper. I didn't pull her aside into the corridor. I planted my feet, looked directly at the side of her head, and spoke loudly enough for the entire back half of the classroom to hear. "If you're done with this relationship, just say that." The effect was instantaneous. The performative apathy vanished, replaced immediately by wide-eyed panic. The illusion of her control had snapped. Later that afternoon, the Ice Queen routine completely melted into a puddle of desperate backpedaling. She tracked me down, apologizing profusely, suggesting we could easily fix things, that we could make it work. When I didn't budge, the bargaining began. She actually suggested that if we did break up, we absolutely had to remain best friends. I looked at her and felt absolutely nothing. I wasn't ending it because of the exams or even the absurd voicemail. I was ending it because, in a single sequence of events, she had pulled back the curtain and showed me exactly how deeply immature she was. I chose my own peace of mind. I chose myself. Walking away from her that day felt like dropping a 100-pound backpack I hadn't realized I was carrying. I felt unchained. The quiet that followed wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of her freeze-out. It was a clean, breathable emptiness. We spent the rest of the school year coexisting in the same building, navigating the halls like two positively charged magnets repelling each other. No screaming matches, no cafeteria drama, just two people who used to know everything about each other pretending the other was a stranger. 8 months drifted by. The bitter chill of the breakup thawed out, replaced by the careless momentum of being 17. Autumn rolled around, bringing with it the annual city festival, a sprawling, chaotic event that temporarily transformed our quiet town into a sensory overload of fried dough, cheap carnival games, and aggressive bass bumping from oversized speakers. I went out that Saturday night with a group of friends, including a guy named Reese who possessed a spectacular talent for encouraging terrible ideas. We were moving through the dense crowd, the neon lights of the Ferris wheel bleeding into the night sky, casting long, unnatural shadows across the pavement. And keeping in tradition with small-town teenage rebellion, we had managed to drink a fair amount of cheap alcohol before arriving. The world felt loose, fuzzy around the edges, and entirely forgiving. We were standing near a cluster of food trucks, the smell of burnt sugar and hot grease thick in the air, when I turned around and nearly collided with her. Tamsin, she wasn't alone. Standing rigidly beside her was a guy I recognized vaguely from a rival high school. Let's call him Declan. They had been dating for a few months, a fact that had trickled down to me through the inescapable grapevine of our graduating class. The initial shock of the run-in hung in the air for a fraction of a second. I noticed something immediately. Maybe it was just the reflection of the carnival lights, or maybe it was the lingering ghost of a first love, but as she looked at me, she still had that distinct, undeniable sparkle in her eyes. It's a look that sticks to the ribs of your memory when you're young. We fell into a rhythm of stiff, overly polite small talk. The kind of painfully generic conversation you have when you're desperately trying to prove how well you're doing. We talked about driver's licenses, the brutal reality of parallel parking exams, and vague plans for college. The entire time, Declan stood awkwardly at her shoulder, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He looked like a man waiting for a root canal. But then the alcohol simmering in Tamsin's bloodstream clearly seized the steering wheel. The polite facade shattered, and things took a sharp, violently uncomfortable turn. Without any warning, she bypassed the safe territory of the present and dove headfirst into our past. She started reminiscing about our time together. Not just the innocent memories, but the deep, emotional ones. She laughed about inside jokes that Declan couldn't possibly understand. She talked about how incredibly close we had been, her voice taking on a thick, nostalgic syrup. I offered tight, noncommittal nods, my eyes darting nervously toward Declan, whose jaw was clenching so hard I thought his teeth might crack. And then she went further. She crossed the line, sprinted past it, and set it on fire. With her current boyfriend standing less than 12 inches away, Tamsin began openly discussing the details of our past physical intimacy. She recounted how wild our love life had been, dropping specifics that hung in the cold night air like toxic gas. I froze, entirely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the moment. I just stood there, offering vague hums of agreement, my brain frantically searching for an emergency exit. I would never, under any circumstances, bring up past intimacy in front of an ex's new partner. It was a staggering display of disrespect. Declan apparently reached his absolute limit. He didn't yell, he didn't start a fight. He simply detached himself from her side, turned his back, and vanished into the sea of people without a single word. Honestly, I couldn't blame him. If I were standing in his shoes, listening to my girlfriend romanticize her ex's bedroom skills, I would have walked into traffic. What shocked me more was that he didn't break up with her right then and there. With her boyfriend gone, I assumed the conversation would naturally die. But Tamsin's mind was apparently operating on a frequency I couldn't comprehend. Having successfully chased off Declan, she seamlessly abandoned the topic of our sex life and pivoted to something utterly surreal. Her eyes went wide, reflecting the strobing lights of a nearby ride. She leaned in close, the scent of vanilla mixing with the sharp tang of vodka, and told me she had recently gotten heavily into mantras and deep meditation. "I've been having these recurring dreams," she whispered, her tone deadpan and completely serious. "My third eye is opening. I've actually experienced the awakening." I stared at her, my mouth slightly ajar. She didn't stop. She launched into a frantic explanation of her new spiritual awakening, proudly declaring her devotion to what she called a polygonal religion. She spoke of geometric spiritual planes and intersecting energy fields, her hands drawing frantic triangles in the air between us. At that exact moment, the last remaining thread of my mental presence snapped. I completely checked out. The lingering ghost of our past, the nostalgia, the tension, it all evaporated, replaced by the profound realization that I was talking to someone who had entirely lost the plot. "That sounds really intense," I managed to say, taking a deliberate step backward. "I should probably go find Reese. Have a good night, Tamsin." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and practically jogged back toward my friends, leaving her standing there beneath the neon lights, presumably trying to align her polygons. The adrenaline of the bizarre encounter, combined with the lingering alcohol, demanded some kind of chaotic release. Reese, sensing the erratic energy of the night, decided that going home empty-handed was unacceptable. Which is how, roughly an hour later, the two of us found ourselves wrestling with a heavy metal temporary bus stop replacement sign on the outskirts of town. It was a monument to teenage stupidity. We uprooted the heavy iron base, hoisted the metal pole onto our shoulders, and proceeded to carry it for 2 solid miles in the freezing cold, laughing hysterically at the sheer absurdity of our own theft. We dragged that massive yellow and green sign all the way back to his garage, hiding it like a prized artifact. Was it a proud moment? Absolutely not. Would sober Kalen have done it? Not a chance. But looking back at the sheer physical effort it took to steal public transportation infrastructure just to burn off the weirdness of my ex-girlfriend's spiritual breakdown, it remains incredibly funny. A lot of years have passed since that heavy metal pole scraped across the asphalt. The timeline moved forward, burying the drama of high school under the weight of real life. I finished my education, earned my bachelor's degree, and built a career. Today, I work full-time as a software developer, spending my days writing code, building mobile apps, and constructing websites. My life is quiet, structured, and entirely devoid of high school theatrics. Yet, for a long time after that festival, the ghost of that relationship lingered in the periphery of my hometown. I would occasionally bump into Tamsin's best friends at the grocery store or a local bar. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. More than once, they pulled me aside after a few drinks to tell me how unfortunate it was that we had broken up. They watched her cycle through a parade of deeply questionable guys, and they weren't shy about telling me that she had completely fumbled our relationship. Hearing her own inner circle admit that I was actually a good catch offered a quiet, vindicating sense of closure. But holding on to the past is a poison, even when you're the one who was right. From what I hear now, Tamsin has been in a stable, long-term relationship for quite a while. She seems genuinely happy, and I mean it when I say I wish her the absolute best. My own life turned out remarkably well. Right around the time the world shut down in 2020, amidst the chaos of the pandemic, I met Alara. We built our foundation when the world was standing still, and now, heading into our 6th year together, we're actively talking about marriage. She is grounding, brilliant, and thankfully, has zero interest in polygonal religions. Looking back at the entire saga, the suffocating voicemail, the freezing silence, the deeply inappropriate festival encounter, and the stolen bus sign, it remains one of the most chaotic chapters of my life. But it taught me something invaluable. When someone shows you who they are, especially when the pressure is on, believe them immediately. Respecting yourself means having the absolute courage to walk away from a bad situation, even when it feels like you're losing the most important thing in your world. Because the truth is, you're not losing anything at all. You're just making room for a future that actually makes sense. If this story reminded you of your own chaotic teenage years, or if you've ever had to deal with an ex who completely lost their mind, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. I want to hear about the craziest thing an ex ever said to you after a breakup. Until next time, keep your standards high and maybe leave the public bus signs where you found them.